Today is the 23rd of September, 2014, and this is episode 147. This program is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is new, highly experimental, and we're not experts, just obsessed companions walking the road towards a more peer-to-peer future. Welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today we're doing something a little different. Wendell Davis recently invited me to a discussion about cryptocurrency, how it intersects with virtual reality and game worlds. If you enjoy this type of focus, make sure to leave a comment over at letstalkbitcoin.com and let us know. Enjoy the show.
Hi everyone, Wendell here. Thanks for downloading the very first episode of the CryptoVR podcast. We're doing this as a kind of pilot for the Let's Talk Bitcoin network, so if you like it, please let us know. Alright, so imagine this. You're playing your favorite massively multiplayer online game. Maybe you're a warrior at the head of your clan or a space jockey running errands for some interstellar corporation. Up until now, the economic ramifications of your actions in the virtual world have had little effect on you, the human being, in the real one. I mean, sure, maybe you were hit up with the game's download charge, or maybe you made the odd virtual item purchase with your credit card. Even if millions in in-game valuables flow through your hands, it's usually of little consequence to your day-to-day, real-life economic situation. You probably still have a normal day job to pay for the computer, the game, the virtual goods, the internet connection. But imagine that an update downloads with one really important change. The developers decided to include a new token called a cryptocurrency in the game.
You may have heard of Bitcoin.
This is my co-host, Adam B. Levine.
Hey there.
Hey, Adam, how are you doing?
Pretty good today.
So what's a cryptocurrency and what's this Bitcoin?
So you can think about a cryptocurrency like cash that lives on the internet as kind of the most basic form. If I'm standing in front of you, Wendell, and I hand you a $5 bill, then we have just had a peer-to-peer transaction, essentially. I, one peer, gave you something, and that, the giving is the transaction. The problem is that when you go online, whether it be for, signing up for like a game like you're talking about, or buying something on Amazon, or even just if you want to read an article on something like the New York Times, you have to give them your credit card information and actually, or PayPal, which holds your credit card information. And this is not ideal at all, because when you pay with a method like a credit card or PayPal, what you're actually doing is you're saying to your credit card company or to PayPal, "Hello, PayPal, I would like to pay this person money, and I don't have a way to shove my dollar bills through the internet wire, so I would like you to owe them money, and I will owe you money. And then you have my credit card information, so you can charge my credit card, and then you can pay them forward, and you can take a little cut." And that's fine, but the problem with it is that it's not necessary for everything. Wendell, so that's really what a cryptocurrency is at its core, is it's a online method of payment that doesn't have that problem. When I send you Bitcoin or a game token built on this type of technology or whatever, then just like cash, there's no bank that I can call after the fact to get it back. And so because it's a sure thing, because we both know that once I send it to you, it's yours no matter what I do, unless you voluntarily decide to send it back to me. It means that you don't have to, you can trust me. Once I've paid you, there's no way I can unpay you. Whereas with the current system that we have, there is.
Now we have a cryptocurrency, a virtual token kind of that represents real in-game value. So it's something that, I guess thanks to cryptography, we actually verifiably own. So it sounds like that means we could trade it outside of the game, or even create exchange sites where people can swap it for anything else, totally beyond the control of the game developers. Is that right?
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that if you just, game currencies, they've been around. That's actually not that new of a thing. But that's the thing, is that they only exist inside of the game. What cryptocurrencies let you do is they let you take whatever it is that you're doing inside of the game, or better yet, to build new games that utilize these cryptocurrencies at kind of a base layer, so that instead of having, just an unlimited number of swords out there, maybe there's only 2 million swords. And if you want a sword and there's more than 2 million players, then you have to get one. Or it might make more sense for you to have a hammer that there's 2 million of as well, but not as many people like that. So yeah, the ability to use these tokens outside of the game environment, that's really what cryptocurrency brings. It's like a rule set for the real world.
So does that imply then that all those kids that are playing games all the time, that they're doing some kind of weird future job training in some way? That you could make money inside of a game and like that's what you live off of?
a career, a job is something historically that people had because you didn't know where you were more valuable, right? If when someone's working at like a retailer like Target, they're not doing it because they want that to be, their life's accomplishment. They're doing it because that's a job that they can actually acquire right now. And it's one that they can count on. But what if you had an application on your phone, where you put in all the skills you have? I'm a retail worker. Well, what if on this particular day, Walmart is expecting a whole bunch of people and they could use more retail workers? If they are offering more money for the work at the same time, and you have the choice of going between the two where you want to work, you're qualified for both, you can do the work for both, and you don't get paid unless you do the work, of course. We didn't used to be able to do that because I couldn't know what it was that you were looking for without going through a job service or something like that. But now we have this amazing thing called the internet. So yeah, I mean, in a way, Wendell, this totally is future job training just because it's about looking at systems and seeing the imbalances, seeing, oh, well, swords, man, everybody likes a sword and there's only 2 million of them. So I should get some swords now because at some point they'll run out. Or, hammers, sell those hammers right now. You see it coming in advance.
So there's a view in the sort of the futurist science fiction community that we are rapidly going to be sort of dwindling away from jobs in the meat space world, meaning jobs in the non-virtual world. That like a lot of the things we're doing, that we've hired people, for example, there are 4 million people in the United States that drive for a living. And yet we know that, self-driving cars are coming down the line. And this kind of change is happening in almost every field. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean that we are more and more, though, going to be, doing our business in the virtual world? I mean, are we already? Because if in a way, if you think about like the amount of transactions and things like that actually do, to your point, happen over the internet already, but are we going to end up in that sort of day-to-day existence, living more and more inside of those spaces? And what does that mean if we do?
This is, I think, a natural extension of everything that we've seen to this point. These virtual spaces are useful and valuable simply because they are useful and valuable. If the choice is for us to be doing this show over, just audio only, or for us to be able to actually see each other in person, in quasi in person, in this type of virtual reality space, and be able to see the way that your body looks while you're speaking and see the emotive language that we use, it's a much more complete experience. So to this point, again, that hasn't really been possible. But as we move forward, this technology, like the barriers, they're just not there anymore. So yeah, I mean, it seems like it's inevitable. I did want to push back on one other thing. I don't think it's necessarily a sure thing that we'll see like driverless cars replacing it. I do think, I think that you're right. You've identified that automation is coming. Automation is always coming. But the question is, where does automation most make sense? And I think that looking at the situation through the conventional, through the way that we've done things for the last 100 years, you're right. It makes sense to, take the drivers out of the trucks. But in reality, making self-driving cars and making them interact with each other, there's a lot of variables at play there. So wouldn't it actually make more sense to instead just kind of eliminate most of the companies that are managing all of those drivers? Instead, just make it so all drivers, have the ability to look for work in a common marketplace and then take jobs that they want without the need to have a company enabling them. That's really kind of what I see, is that the automation happens at the top of the pyramid, not at the bottom of the pyramid.
That may be true, but on the other hand, if you think about this, you have, I would guess, laws and things like that will be made kind of around this topic of these cars. Because if you have, for example, let's say, a lot of shipping companies decide to take up this idea of like, well, we don't have to pay anymore for drivers. That means we have like less in terms of insurance. It means the stuff gets there faster. We will probably see a lot of that happening quite quickly because it makes a lot of sense to do it. But in that shift, I think you'll also see laws shifting that, if it's proven, for example, that self-driving cars are significantly safer than cars driven by normal flesh and blood human beings, I wouldn't be surprised if it became, there were special designated roads for actual manual analog drivers, and then at some point, it's just illegal to do it except socially designated areas. And that's going to be a safety point. So I'm not sure that it would end up playing out that way, though I do understand your point and see what you mean.
Well, I think that, again, this is the beautiful part about it, is that either way, whichever one of us is right, we're pretty much going to figure it out in the next 5 to 10 years. The technology, we've kind of passed the tipping point with a couple of these things, and this stuff is just kind of going to happen. So that's, I don't really care if I'm right or wrong. It's just interesting to look at this and say, well, yeah, you're right, we could obsolete at the, at that level, but another thing is the reason why people have problems driving, for example, is because of monotony. When you go to an airport and you're walking out of an airport after you've gotten off a flight, you have to go down this one particular corridor at every airport that is one way only. It's only for people leaving. And there's a person, and there's big signs that say it, and there's a person usually sitting there, a TSA agent, who's facing towards the rest of the airport and looking back at people through a mirror. And so what happens is that people actually, even though there's a person whose only job is to sit there and prevent someone from walking by them going the wrong way, it happens all the time. And it happens because our brains, the way that they work is by doing something, you train your brain to do more of that thing. And so that person's job conflicts with what they do most of the time. They actually spend very little time stopping people and identifying those people, and spend most of their time doing nothing, just sitting there and kind of being bored, and so occupying their mind other ways. So what they did with this, in this story, they installed these cameras that captured telemetry, right? So when you're walking down the hall, you're actually feeding game data into the game that is, you represent it there. They took took these feeds from all of these different airports, and they put them into this one section of the game. And if you went to this one castle and went to this one dungeon, there was just an endless procession of monsters walking along this long road that is essentially all of the real TSA ones. And every time a person walks the wrong way, the system, instead of putting it as a normal monster, they put it as a, quote, wrong way goblin. And then it's the job of the player who, blows their horn, essentially sounds an alarm, and they get paid when they correctly do it. So you can see how this is a very analogous concept, essentially, to what we're talking about here. It allows users to be paid for work they are doing in the real world, where the work is being done in the real world, but where the venue that they're actually doing it is completely disconnected from that. As far as they're concerned, it has nothing to do with the TSA or airports or anything like that. They're just sitting in a dungeon blowing on a horn that, doesn't really exist, and getting paid when they're successful.
That's incredible. So, okay. Oh, that makes sense then. And in fact, I guess I should restate then what I said. To your point, most of those people, they're living in a virtual world, they're working in a virtual world, but it has real life ramifications. Yeah, that makes total sense. Let's talk for a minute about this kind of stuff. Adam, I know you haven't yet tried the Oculus Rift, but that technology was released, I would say, great fanfare, and for good reason, because it's actually a pretty immersive environment in which to sit yourself. We've been talking about this kind of thing coming for a long time, and I think anytime a new technology comes out, the first thing that happens is you have tons and tons of people that are super excited about it, who have had this science fiction vision of the world for a long time, and making all these grand prognostications about what it will be and what it will be used for. And I have to tell you that that was exactly what happened to me the first time I put on an Oculus. It was like, wow, this is really happening. Like, we really are going to be living in these spaces, because the effect is so incredibly convincing. And I think this is what gives me some thought about what is the intersection of cryptocurrency and virtual reality? Because in truth, right now, it's actually quite difficult to, for example, if you're wearing the VR helmet to make an interaction with somebody else, it's quite difficult to do it, because, your keyboard, for the most part, it's never exactly where you think it is. And even if you keep your hands on it, it creates a weird effect in the virtual world that doesn't really seem to be quite right. But still, nevertheless, if you're inside of a game, or you're inside of just some virtual space where people are interacting, you're going to want to be able to transact. You're going to want to be able to make exchanges and do things like this. So when you're inside of a virtual world, to make transactions right now, like imagining that
right,
certain things were connected to it in the way they are now, you would have to remove yourself from the context of the virtual world and then go to this other thing to make your payment, which I think is not how that fluid thing will end up playing out.
I can't talk about the specifics of the technology necessarily.
But it will be easy. That's I think the takeaway for me is that
regardless of what the specific solution is, it will be easy. Whether it's like looking at a payment and blinking 3 times with your left eye and 1 with your right, and the camera looking at your eyes, knows that means that open up this payment address and, set it up for authorization or something like that. Like the specific mechanism, I don't know, but they will be integrated really closely because they're both, tell me about I don't know that much about the 3D side and about the virtual reality side. So Wendell, tell me, is this an open source movement that's happening on that side too? Because that's one of the reasons that it's really easy to integrate with cryptocurrencies, because nearly everything is being done in the open source and people want you to use it.
Yeah, right now there's a combination of the two. People coming from the games world who are very excited about this new technology, and their stuff tends not to be open source. But then there are a lot of people that are making really awesome open source tools. For example, this guy that's known by his alias Mr. Doob, Ricardo Cabello, he is actually written an extension for his very famous now 3.js library, which allows you to create great WebGL graphics. He's written an extension for that supports output to the Oculus. So this is pretty exciting. There's a lot of open source stuff that's happening, but I think that overall, because it's been largely dominated up to this point, which is super early days, by the games development side, that hasn't really been the case. Now, there are a few interesting people out there that are really kind of see where all this is going. So, for example, High Fidelity is a new startup that was created by Philip Rosedale, the creator of Second Life. He has taken an open source approach from the ground up. So the entire thing is open source. And in fact, he seems to be integrating some kind of cryptocurrency into it as well. The downloaded version that I tried out is really more or less just like some kind of chat app. But given that it's Philip Rosedale, you have quite a clear idea that it has much broader ambitions. This is a pretty exciting project to watch because he's doing everything, I would say, correctly from this perspective of being open, probably monetizing in some really interesting way, understanding that it needs to be multi-platform, it has to be everywhere, it has to support everything. So we're seeing a lot of kind of furious development around that particular platform, which is very exciting.
The open source thing, I think, is really interesting to highlight because, you said it there. It's about it being agnostic, right? It's about it not necessarily being for one purpose. It's kind of like Second Life was kind of like that, but at the same time, there was still, a Linden Labs. There was still a controlling entity that had some decisions to make and had to create things. But really, what it kind of seems like is that this is more almost like virtual reality as a protocol, so that anybody who wants to make their thing, whatever their thing is, virtual reality, can essentially do that or can create it in such a way so that it can work with this technology. Is that a good way to think about it, Wendell?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, additionally, what's really interesting is that you now have people like the developers of Firefox talking about what this is all going to be like and how they're going to integrate this into browsers and so on and so on. So I mean, I think it is a good and fair analogy. Once the intersection of cryptocurrency comes along with this, there will also be this awareness of, for example, new funding models. I see no reason that these technologies shouldn't be funded in the same way that a lot of new and exciting technologies are being funded in the cryptocurrency space. Like if you look at the way Ethereum did their fundraise, they actually created a new token. They created a unique token that was the token that you would actually use to power the massively distributed virtual computer known as Ethereum. You have storage that's going to be basically, taking the token that you bought for your Bitcoin and using that to pay for storage space. It's very interesting, and I think you're going to see something like that happening in the VR space as well. As far as I understand, for example, High Fidelity, they took investment in normal dollars, and they are a normal company that will seek to make a more traditional profit. I don't think there's going to be anything special about the crypto token, but we'll wait to see.
Well, so I want to bring up the example of Star Citizen here because I think that this is like a forerunner project as far as I'm concerned for what we're kind of going to see happen here. Star Citizen was one of the most funded projects. It's a game on Kickstarter, and they again went through this conventional process. And they didn't involve any tokens. There's nothing like that. Basically, it's this epic sci-fi game. Epic space swashbuckling sort of thing. The team creating it has a lot of credibility behind them, and people are very excited about it. So what they offered for kind of higher tier rewards at like above the $250 level were these ship packages, where once the game actually is playable, then you can get one of these limited edition ships that were only sold, specific outfitting or, specific storylines or something like that, that make these ships relatively unique compared to the ones that come after. And so what of course happened is that it's going to take 3 years to develop that project. It's, I think, a year and a half into it, but there's still a year and a half left. And over that year and a half, some people have, of course, said, oh, well, I bought this at a time when I thought I wanted it, but now, well, I'd rather have the money than have the ship. And so what they did is they made it so that it's not a formal token system, but they've created a marketplace where people can actually sell their ship reward packages to other people, and it's been quite successful. And again, like, these things go for $650, sometimes $1,000 for fancy ships. So again, like, you could take that exact same idea, and the only thing you change is you make it so that each ship, instead of being represented by some credit on the website or on the market, is actually a token unto itself. And so if there's only 100 of a ship, there's only 100 of that token, and it's very easy, and it makes it so that a market can exist. Not just on that company's website, but anywhere that it can happen. So again, like, the advantage of the token is that it lets you take a game that is by its nature closed and gives utility, lets you use the things that you have in the game in the real world for other uses.
Yeah, in fact, it sounds like any game developer who did this, they would actually be able to create that token, and they wouldn't even have to worry about the marketplace depending on how they created it. Because It seems if it were valuable, people would be putting it onto all the decentralized exchanges and things like that come along if they're not there inherently. And trading could commence as soon as it was issued.
Right, and the game company doesn't have to have negotiations. I mean, like, they can do that if they want to. If, like, it's important to them to be listed on certain exchanges, then they can have conversations. But there's no requirement, because they're not doing anything that's super new. They're just creating another token. And exchanges know how to deal with tokens. But yeah, Wendell, like you said, even if they aren't on a real exchange, they're still on the peer-to-peer exchange. So anybody who actually wants that can, trade. If you want to put up a price where I'll trade 2 of this ship token for 1 of this ship token, you can do that too and completely avoid anything but just ship tokens entirely, so long as you can find someone who's willing to trade with you.
Awesome. So, Adam, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about this idea that I've heard you talk about called token-controlled access.
Yeah, token-controlled access. It started off as token-controlled viewpoint, actually. That was really what I started off looking at it with. And so the idea is that with Bitcoin or with, any cryptocurrency that's been out there until the beginning of this year, you could have one type of token. So Bitcoin wallets can only hold Bitcoin, and that makes sense because that's what goes in a Bitcoin wallet. Counterparty and now Doge Party on Dogecoin have launched, and essentially they allow you to create new types of tokens that actually live on the same blockchains. That's a kind of complicated way of saying that now my Bitcoin wallet, instead of just holding Bitcoin, holds Bitcoin, but it also can hold Atom, and it also can hold swords, and it can hold, hammers, and any sort of asset that someone creates for whatever the application is or whatever the game is can live in that same wallet. If it can live in that wallet, and if Bitcoin addresses are transparent, which is to say that you can look up any Bitcoin address and see the contents of it because it's a public blockchain, that we can turn these tokens that aren't Bitcoin into keys. And so when you visit a website that's set up to do this, or if you go to a virtual world that's set up to do this, then you can say, this is my wallet. Look at this wallet, and any tokens I have, those are my keys. And then based on what's in your wallet, that controls what you have in, on the website or in the game. And so that's a really interesting thing, is that it means that rather that, like, you have an inventory interface almost, where your wallet becomes the real world counterpart of what's going on in whatever the application is that you're talking about. And so if you decide that you want to sell something, like, for example, you could create a game where levels are actually a token. And for every level, you get a new token. And if you want to sell your level to someone else, you can do that. And because you might rather have the money. So if you just want to farm, level 40 or something like that forever, then maybe there's a game out there for you.
In role-playing games, for example, it's always possible to level up and to kind of like take on almost like a new role, like you become something else. It sounds to me then you could actually receive a token when you actually level up. And that token, it could be something that reveals new parts of the world to you. In other words, if you're playing a game and you have, like, let's say you've reached level 30 of whatever that means of your character, suddenly you have new vision. It's like you can actually see the world in a different way. Like there are doors that weren't there before. There are, things in the sky that weren't there before. token-controlled viewpoints actually are similar to how games work now, right? So when you play a role-playing game, usually, if your character is more advanced, the world responds and becomes more difficult and more advanced. But this is taking it in kind of a different direction because, to your point, it's kind of like a key. And that key could be handed off to another character for some amount of money or as a gift. But it, of course, doesn't mean that they're prepared to enter that world, but the key could exist.
What if you traded levels for, in this RPG, there was a trainer that would give you the ability to be cross-class. Like, you have the ability to also become an archer. If you trade me 2 of your levels, then I'll give you back 1 archer token. So I mean, you can, again, it's whatever happens in the game now. With tokens, you can make it so it can also work outside the game. And that doesn't mean you're an archer outside the game, but it means that you have that archer asset as something you can choose to do whatever you want with. And so selling it is one thing, but, selling it within the game, I think that's a really interesting venue that we haven't really gone down.
Yeah, because of course, and again, in the traditional role-playing game, at least going back to this point, you would receive these points, and then, of course, can assign these points to attributes. But, indeed, if you receive a token that gives you that kind of power, or if you have more of those tokens, that's a pretty interesting thought. And, let's say all of recorded history in the MMO world, in particular, there's been, this aftermarket of these things. Ultima Online, I remember they were playing offline. You could basically be approached by an avatar in the game, and they would hand you the thing once you paid for it. There was a big, if you recall, when Second Life first came out, and it was revealed that people were paying real money for land inside of the virtual game. That was a thing, and that was an early sort of example of this. But in this case, it really sounds like these things, again, they'll be all really totally open to market. So if a game becomes massive, like something like Path of Exile is like this seemingly overnight sensation in the gaming world, something like that, it seems to me, it has a pretty great reach because, in fact, even people who aren't playing the game could participate in its economy in a weird way. Like, even if you don't even have the game installed, you may recognize that this level up token, this sword, this whatever has some value, and you build a business around that even outside of it.
It's the economic incentives that really make it interesting. When people fundraise, generally speaking, you have the problem. Then people have given you money, and so, if they want to get their money back, you're kind of the natural person to go to. But again, tokens make it so it's just not about the company anymore. It's about, if I'm selling swords in order to pre-fund my game, then when you buy swords from me, I don't accept those swords back. But if you find someone on the market who would like to buy that sword from you, you can probably get most of your money back. So it makes it so, again, you just have more options without restricting what it is that the company fundraising is doing. Because the thing that you don't want is you don't want the fundraising company to be incurring costs by fundraising. That's the most ridiculous thing, and it's what kind of the system has gone to, is that the cost of fundraising actually is going to get quite a bit higher than it is now. And so again, this is a good way to kind of head that off at the pass. This episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin is brought to you by CryptoKit.com. We'll be starting full sponsorships again soon, so stay tuned. Today's magic word is game. That's G-A-M-E, game. You've got until the 27th of September to visit letstalkbitcoin.com and enter the magic word for your share of the listener rewards. Back to the show.
Most game economies are centrally managed for a very specific reason. I mean, they actually have to deal with the influx of new characters, new people, and new demands that are put on the system. And they're centrally managed largely because, when it's centrally managed, it's easy to pull things out of the economy, reinsert things into the economy, and so on. But as we saw, Diablo 3, for example, experienced hyperinflation, and there have been a couple other examples like that, where it just wouldn't have flown with the community of the users, the gamers themselves, to be able to do that. What are the ramifications that you think game developers will have to face in doing something like this and really freeing up not only just like the money in their games, but also the items, maybe the levels, all these kinds of things? Like in the most extreme case where a game company is just saying, you know what, we're just going to let the free market take care of all this. What do you think the ramifications are for those worlds?
Initially, there would be confusion, and initially, but again, it's like any type of new economy. I think that the altcoin markets are a little bit instructive here because they're crazy markets. And markets are crazy generally because they don't have good information. And so it'd be much the same thing here is that if you had a company that was very public about these are the rules of our game. This is the way it responds to certain circumstances. This is the way it won't respond. Here are the things it will do. Here are the things it won't do. If you lay out a simple set of rules like that, then you can have very, very complex sets of interactions emerge because as your players get to know the rules, then they figure out ways to, make them work to their best advantage. So the thing that you don't want to do, and the thing I think that is the temptation, is to do that control, is to make everything about what you think it should be. And the problem with that is that sometimes you're going to be right, but a lot of times you're going to be wrong. And when you're wrong, it's your fault. So the advantage of using natural systems, the advantage of using systems of setting parameters, identifying where value comes from, and then building a system that you basically just tweak or leave alone is that people get that stability and they get to, the system becomes understood and then things get very stable because it's not that exciting. The quantities are known. Whereas if you have a currency, or if you have a game where, one day the gold supply is this, but another day the gold supply is, this multiple of this number because, we decided that it would be better if we had this multiple of this number, then that would cause chaos because when people, when the change is made, people will have already made decisions. They'll already have thought about it and said, okay, well, this is my best move. And that best move, if they're making a change, probably is no longer the best move because otherwise there's no reason to make a change. So you can just see how the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I'm not saying game developers are bad, people are bad at this or anything like that. I'm saying that this is something that world leaders have enormous problems doing with sometimes simpler systems. And so we just need to acknowledge what we don't know.
So that's interesting because what you're saying then is that we are in effect looking at two scenarios. In fact, we're kind of mirroring what's going on, in the cryptocurrency world versus, the traditional government-issued currencies and things like that we're seeing. So, the economies, in fact, we're able to, in a way, test out and experiment with a lot of different things. And this kind of brings me to another point, which is, let's take away the game side for the time being, because of course that's not for everyone, and not everybody plays these games. But in a way, it seems that virtual reality not only has touched everybody in a pretty significant way. If you look at how much people literally touch their iPhones and things like that every single day, it's not too far-fetched to imagine that, this will continue to envelop people and become, a more and more ingrained part of our lives. So if we think about virtual reality or augmented reality in the sense that basically this is something which either, subsumes our environment or, again, augments it, then we have a couple different ways of looking at it. So in the augmented reality scenario, it's obvious that, current thoughts and implications of cryptocurrency apply more or less directly. In the virtual environment, I'm not so sure that that's the case because you have an entirely new environment in a way, even though it does, as we just discussed, touch the outside world, and maybe those things interact, very directly. The world itself is something that one fully immerses in a manner of speaking. So if we have a scenario like that, it also seems to me that we will have the ability to take advantage of some of the more extreme and new interesting ideas that are coming out of the cryptocurrency space, particularly regarding smart contracts and things like this. So I've seen projects like the People's Republic of Doug that Dennis McKinnon has put together, which aims to be an entire governance platform built on top of Ethereum. And this is pretty interesting. I mean, right now it's fairly basic. It allows people to vote and choose things on a Reddit-like platform. Then those decisions that are made are actually implemented in a contract. This is a pretty interesting concept, but it implies that, in these virtual worlds, something like that may come about as well. And in fact, it implies to me, in a way, that in those virtual worlds, every single one of the, worlds that you visit could, in fact, have its own governance, economic experiment playing out that you would have to authorize in the same way that an iPhone authorizes for your location or for, grabbing your contact data or something like this. That when you come into it, you would have to basically say, in this world, we levy these kind of taxes, or in this world, we need permission to change your avatar because we don't want lewd things, or in this world, we may see some really incredible crossover between what's possible with smart contracts, using a platform like Ethereum, and what is traditionally understood to be in virtual worlds. Do you have any thoughts about that, Adam?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that smart contracts, is kind of an intimidating phrase. Really what we're talking about here is automation, right? Is the ability to automate just about anything and then tie it to certain states. And so those states can be, like we were talking about earlier with token-controlled access, they can be tokens in a wallet, right?
Mm-hmm. Do we believe that the implications and the grand visions of smart contract use, it can be used indeed to fortify contracts between people, it can be used to fortify contracts between different economic institutions, or it could be used as a governance for an entire quote-unquote nation. Like these smart contracts built on top of each other create complex rule sets. They basically create software that, makes things work.
There's a huge amount that's possible with it. I think the temptation is going to be, now that we, again, this is a new tool, and so the temptation is naturally going to be to use it as much as possible. Let's just talk real quickly about things that you don't want to use tokens for. Basically, you don't want to use tokens for anything where you actually don't want the things that a token gives you, right? So if you don't want people to be able to trade whatever it is that you're representing as a token, you shouldn't make it a token. So there are just fundamentally some things that, at least in the current paradigm, we don't want to be tokens. Like imagine, I've been thinking about the idea of what if a job was, what if the ability to perform a job was tied to having a token? And when you are going to leave your job, you actually sell your token to the person who's going to replace you. And it doesn't mean that you automatically get paid to do that job. You still have to do the role that's required. So in a world where there's, 10,000 or 1 million tokens, the only type of person who would even want to buy that type of token is someone who's aware that, this is a token that would make me an editor at Let's Talk Bitcoin. And so if I have this, then for every, article that I edit that makes it onto the front page, I'll earn this much LTB coin. So because of that, it actually might make sense for them to hold it. But anyways, that's the thing is like, I don't really have any hard and fast answers for you, Wendell, on this one. I'm just amazed by the possibilities and really mostly trying to wrap my head around all of the different things that we can do.
Yeah, so what you said, it sounds a lot like the taxi medallion system that actually exists in many cities right now, right? So it's like if you hold that medallion, you are quote unquote, of course you have to have a license and all this, but
exactly. It's basically the same thing, except that instead of it going through all of these layers of extra bureaucracy, all you have is just the token. I mean, that's really, it's exactly right. Like a cab license is exactly that. It's a token. Just one that isn't very transmissible.
It's difficult to know exactly how all these things will end up being used. This is a largely experimental territory, if not entirely. And I think it's very interesting to think about that, though. Like, the combination of the two, and the reason that I created this podcast in the first place is because I was thinking there will be a direct overlap between virtual reality, meaning the reality that isn't our normal sort of meat space reality, but the one inside of the network, cryptocurrency. It's quite clear that they go together in some very interesting ways. I think it's especially true when you look at what's possible with smart contracts, like what can be enforced in these different ways. In Second Life, I can tell you from experience that, for example, it's considered a little bit rude to walk into someone's house because people set up homes there. It's considered rude to just walk into someone's home, just as it is in the real world, without coming in and knocking or asking permission or something like this. And yet, because of the way the system is created, it's sometimes possible just to do that. Just as it is in the real world. If you wanted to, you could break into somebody's house. But, in the context of smart contracts, it's possible to set up a contract which stipulates very clearly that the user himself, meaning not the developer, but the user, who is interestingly enough in part a developer, but the user can say, to enter my home, you need this pair of keys. To go back to the word that you used earlier, you need this pair of keys to get in. Otherwise, you can't. You need this pair of keys to use this device that I've created in this world. You need this token, this pair of keys, to do some action. In a world that's totally programmed by its users, and Second Life again was sort of that in a way, but it had its limitations and its economy was very much centrally controlled. But you could write interesting scripts that would create objects and things like that. Here, in this context of adding an Ethereum-like smart contracts layer to virtual worlds, you can see very clearly that it would be possible to literally program anything. If you think about, because I'm starting to think about virtual worlds in this way, where if we really are going to have this mass proliferation of things like the Oculus Rift and that we are going to sort of exist in the Z-axis to a certain extent, then, web pages as they're currently built, for example, designers make a thing where they call it responsive design. And that means, hey, this thing will respond to whether or not you're using it on a mobile device. It will respond to whether you're using it on a desktop. And that means it sometimes retracts features, it retracts the design, and so on. But I believe we'll also be creating a kind of responsive design for these environments. Like, what is it to interact with it in 3D? In 3D that actually, you can move your head around and see it. I think that kind of thing is going to happen. And that's why I think that this topic will be interesting, because that additional access and that additional interaction layer provides users with so much more that they can do, and so much more that they can actually, touch and accomplish. I think, yeah, I'm rambling here, but you get the
Well,
point.
yeah, well, again, I think I finally get what you're trying to ask me here. And yeah, I think that what you described with the house in Second Life and the problem that, where it's just kind of understood that you don't just walk into somebody's house because that's rude. Well, with tokens, we can actually completely solve that problem. You can make it so that, and actually this would involve multiple tokens. It might be, or maybe just variable amounts of the same one. So one could imagine that if you were using multiple tokens, you might have one token that represents the deed to the house that lets you buy or sell the house and controls all of the tokens underneath it. You might have one that's like a workman token that allows someone to change the furniture or to add things but not to subtract, or you could pick whatever kind of arbitrary rules you want. And then you might have house keys that you give to guests that give them access to it, but don't let them change it, don't let them sell it, and don't let them do any of those other things. Or the other way you could do it with multiple tokens is it could be like 10 of the house token represents the ability to be a workman, 100 tokens represents the ability, represents the total ownership of the house, and 1 represents a house key that lets you enter. Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's episode was provided by Wendell Davis and Adam B. Levine. This episode was edited by Adam Levine, and music was provided by Jared Rubens and General Fuzz. See you next time.